Welcome to MapCrow, the RPG art show. My name is Kyle, and today we are building better Mind Flayers. This episode is brought to you by Monstober. That's right, I too am getting in on the big Inktober craze, and I have made my own prompt list. To play along, all you gotta do is roll a 10-sided die twice, once for the left column and then once for the right column. You can pick from any of the three columns on the right or all of them with the prompt that you rolled. There's really not a lot of super strict rules about this. I don't care what medium you use, just have fun and use the hashtag Monstober so I can check out what you're doing. Mind Flayers are unique to Dungeons & Dragons. They have been there almost since the beginning, and they're basically like squid wizards from space. They can use powerful psycho-Kawutsits abilities to cloud the minds of men and, control people, and there's also this whole process by which they can turn other people into Mind Flayers. And other than their aesthetics, which is kind of like this purple squid head with tentacles, they're kind of just vampires that can die more easily. Like, vampires can hypnotize people, vampires have magical powers, vampires can turn other people into vampires. You see where I'm going with this? There's this kind of, Cthulhu tentacle monster beyond time and space thing that they're trying to go for. But the reason why Cthulhu can kind of get away with it and pull that off is because he never actually wakes up and does anything. So you can never foil Cthulhu's plans because he's kind of just like this elemental force in the background. Versus Mind Flayers, which just get defeated like any other wizard or vampire your party goes up against. So once again, I am butting in to do the job that nobody asked me to do or wants me to do, and I'm going to fix Mind Flayers. We are going to figure out how to make them more imposing than just purple squid wizards from space. So the first thing I'm going to do is make that squid body transparent. I am going to really draw some inspiration from deep sea life that is so deep there is no light, and what little there is will pass through their transparent bodies in the unknowable depths of the ocean. So that's kind of based off of an animal called the glass octopus. But I'm also borrowing the eyes from the vampire squid, which is this kind of like deep, unknowable blue reflective color that I found deeply creepy as a child. I actually had nightmares about the vampire squid for several years, more than I'd care to admit. Also, the transparent head allows us to show that this Mind Flayer has 3 brains in its noggin. Maybe the first brain closest to the eyes was the one that it was born with, and maybe the other 2 are brains that it found so valuable and juicy with information that it kind of subsumed them into its own cranium. And that's when we introduce my favorite flavor to add in this series, body horror. I like to imagine my Mind Flayer kind of constantly snacking on, a brain or 2 and just allowing these twitching bodies to kind of dangle freely from underneath its chewing mouths. It kind of clearly telegraphs this whole thing about like transforming into a Mind Flayer without actually threatening the players with a good time. Like if they become a Mind Flayer, then it's kind of like becoming a vampire or werewolf. Sure, there are going to be some inconvenient things, but actually that sounds pretty cool. You mean I get to be a purple octopus man with mind powers? That doesn't sound so bad. This is kind of a completely unenviable position for the players to be in. When they see these humanoid bodies dangling from the mouths of this Mind Flayer, they'll be like, I don't want that to happen to me. I also like these identifiable dangling bodies for another reason. It sort of implies a kind of boss fight mechanic. Imagine that you are assaulting this Mind Flayer in its subterranean laboratory. Perhaps it detects the presence of your mind and lunges to gobble up, say, a wizard that's lying incapacitated on a table. And when it does so, it gets all of these spells that it can use against you, or maybe it munches on a druid and it has the ability to transform into all of these, crazy creatures that it has seen in its interstellar travels. Maybe it can somehow bend the druidic magic and turn you into different animals. Maybe it gobbles up the bard, and imagine how weird it would be to see this dangling body of this bard strumming on a guitar and ensorceling you with a charm person spell or something like that. I think that is far more interesting than kind of just this normal hypnosis that these creatures are kind of more famous for. Also, I just thought of this. The bard is going to have, some healing magic as well. So, maybe if this Mind Flayer's munching on the bard, it can cast, cure wounds on itself or something like that. I love that. That's one of the things that I really enjoyed about those old JRPG bosses, from Final Fantasy or Chrono Trigger or something like that, is they always had you had to figure out in what order you were supposed to kill the boss minions to make sure that it couldn't, heal itself or revive other parts of itself, things like that. One of the things I'm always looking for, that I'm always trying to put into these combat encounters, is something that causes the monster or the players to have to move around the battlefield. Now, it's okay for some fights to just be, you spot the monster, everybody rushes up on him, uses all their cool class abilities, and then the monster's dead. But for a major encounter with an iconic creature, you really want that to kind of last and stick. And one of the best things you can do to make sure that it's a memorable and interesting fight is to introduce some kind of, mechanic that allows the characters and the monsters to move about in the battlefield, to introduce smaller stakes than just your party wipes. For instance, what if you know some of these people that are incapacitated in the laboratory of the Mind Flayer? That would be really interesting to see if you can try to revive them to gain numbers over your adversaries in the middle of the fight. What happens if you see one of your favorite NPCs or quest givers dangling from the mouth of this Mind Flayer? I mean, can you really risk hurting them? Is it too late if they're being munched on? Are they beyond saving? These are kind of the interesting puzzles and questions that players are invited to ask in these situations that makes the battlefield a little less straightforward. Something that works in static media really well is kind of this showdown with a single very powerful creature or bad guy, but in tabletop games that is rarely a good move for a GM to make who's trying to challenge their players. It's always worth stocking a climactic battle with lieutenants to fight, or at least minions that are going to harass your frontline fighters before they can, run up on the boss and just use all of the abilities they've been saving throughout the dungeon. Another really easy thing to do in a boss fight to make it just a little bit more difficult for your players to easy mode their way through it is add 2 of this big climactic monster to fight. So if you want them to fight a Mind Flayer, have them fight 2 Mind Flayers. That way, if, one Mind Flayer goes down on the second round because everybody focuses fire, there's still a Mind Flayer that's in the wind that can either escape to fight another day or get to do some of the cool things that you've been planning in this boss encounter, for weeks. It always feels very good for players to have their characters do the things that their characters do and almost completely bypass or trivialize a boss encounter. That feels fun on occasion, but if that happens every single time, it kind of feels like you're not really playing the game you signed up for sometimes. Credit where credit is due. 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and previous editions do a pretty good job with this granular combat system. If you want a game that is kind of focused around very specific combat outcomes and this kind of push-pull of battle, these games do a really good job at that, and I think probably a better job than a lot of your story games, where things can kind of conclude really quickly because there aren't very specific rules for exactly what happens on every turn, and limiting what the monsters and players can do quite as much as these more popular games. So if you're playing a game with all of these crunchy mechanics, it really, I think, behooves you to take advantage of that in your encounter design. Not necessarily with every single encounter, but certainly with these big, dungeon-ending boss encounters with the iconic monsters. It's worth thinking about. Well, I think that just about wraps it up for this episode. I've really enjoyed kind of doing all these monster videos. If you have a monster that you would like me to draw and talk about and redesign, let me know in the comments below. Next week, I am thinking about just doing a technique tutorial video on how exactly I have been using these colored pencils in this way. That way, people who want to follow along and try to use colored pencils in this way will kind of understand what I'm doing, because I don't think I've actually explained it too well in these videos so far. So until next week, farewell, friends.